Denzel Washington leaned forward at the Hollywood diversity panel and pointed his finger at Vivek Ramaswamy with moral authority. "You're nothing but a sellout minority betraying your community," he declared with passionate conviction. Washington's Hollywood elite audience nodded approvingly, thinking their legendary actor had delivered the perfect social justice takedown. But what Washington didn't know was that Vivek had researched his entire $300 million Hollywood empire and elite lifestyle disconnect. Vivek's response about Washington's Hollywood hypocrisy would completely destroy his credibility and expose the ultimate fake activist. The Beverly Hills Hotel's Crystal Ballroom was filled with Hollywood's most influential figures for the annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit. The opulent venue, with its crystal chandeliers and gold-adorned walls, provided the perfect backdrop for an event that brought together entertainment industry leaders, activists, and public figures to discuss representation and social justice in American culture. The panel discussion titled Success, Responsibility, and Community. Minorities in Leadership featured several prominent figures discussing how successful minorities should use their platforms to advance social justice causes and support their communities. It was supposed to be a celebration of minority achievement combined with a call to action for greater social responsibility. Denzel Washington sat at the panel table with the gravitas that had made him one of America's most respected actors for over 4 decades. His perfectly tailored suit and dignified bearing projected the image of someone who had not only achieved extraordinary success in entertainment, but had also used that success to become a moral voice for social justice and community empowerment. Washington's presence commanded the room in a way that few celebrities could match. His reputation for choosing meaningful roles, his articulate speaking style, and his long-standing commitment to social causes had made him a beloved figure who transcended entertainment to become a cultural icon and moral authority. Across the panel table sat Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been invited to represent the perspective of successful minority entrepreneurs in non-entertainment industries. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his demeanor calm but alert, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had built businesses through innovation rather than celebrity appeal. The panel had proceeded through various discussions about representation in media, the responsibility of successful minorities to give back to their communities, and the role of wealth and influence in advancing social justice causes. Most of the conversation had been predictably progressive, with panelists sharing stories about their activism and their commitment to using their success for social good. That's when Washington decided to make his move. He had been observing Vivek throughout the discussion, clearly viewing him as a representative of successful minorities who were insufficiently committed to social justice activism. Washington sensed an opportunity to establish his moral authority when the conversation turned to the question of whether successful minorities had an obligation to support progressive political causes. "I think we need to have an honest conversation about authenticity and responsibility," Washington began, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly authority that had captivated audiences for decades. "We need to talk about what it means to achieve success as a minority in America, and what obligations come with that success." The setup was classic Washington, using his moral gravitas to frame a discussion about social responsibility while preparing to challenge someone he viewed as insufficiently committed to community activism. The audience of Hollywood executives, activists, and celebrities leaned forward with anticipation, ready to hear their moral champion deliver another powerful message about social justice. "We have people in this room who have been blessed with success, who have been given platforms and opportunities that previous generations could only dream of," Washington continued, his voice growing more pointed. "But success without responsibility is meaningless. Achievement without giving back to the community is hollow. Prosperity without justice is ultimately destructive." The moral framework was being established, and everyone in the ballroom could sense that Washington was building toward a specific challenge to someone's commitment to social justice and community service. "We have individuals who have achieved financial success, who have built businesses and accumulated wealth, but who seem to have forgotten where they came from," Washington said, his gaze beginning to settle on Vivek. "People who talk about individual achievement while ignoring the systemic barriers that their own communities continue to face." The audience murmured with recognition, understanding that Washington was preparing to challenge Vivek's political positions and his apparent resistance to progressive activism and social justice messaging. We have successful minorities who use their platforms not to lift up their communities, but to advance conservative political agendas that ultimately harm the very people who share their background. Washington continued, his voice rising with moral conviction. The attack was becoming more specific and political, transforming what had been a discussion about community responsibility into a direct challenge to conservative political philosophy. Vivek, Washington said, turning to face him directly, his voice carrying the full weight of his moral authority and cultural influence. I have to ask you directly because I think everyone here deserves to understand where you stand on these crucial issues. The confrontation was now completely personal, and everyone in the ballroom could feel the energy shifting from panel discussion to moral judgment. You've achieved remarkable success as an entrepreneur, and I respect that achievement, Washington continued, his voice taking on a tone of disappointed authority. But you've used that success to promote political positions that harm minority communities, to advance conservative agendas that perpetuate systemic inequality, to attack the very programs and policies that help people who look like us succeed. The accusation was direct and damning, painting Vivek as someone who had betrayed his own community for political and financial gain. You're nothing but a sellout minority betraying your community, Washington declared, his voice echoing through the ballroom with the full force of his cultural authority. You've taken the opportunities that civil rights leaders fought and died to create, and you've used them to advance an agenda that would deny those same opportunities to the next generation. The audience erupted in murmurs of agreement and scattered applause, clearly moved by Washington's passionate defense of social justice against what he portrayed as minority betrayal of community interests. But what Washington didn't realize was that he had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had assumed that his reputation as a cultural icon and his moral authority as a social justice advocate would be enough to intimidate someone he clearly viewed as a political opportunist who had abandoned his community for personal gain. He had no idea that he was about to confront someone who had done extensive research on his own lifestyle, wealth, and disconnection from the communities he claimed to represent. Denzel, Vivek said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made everyone in the ballroom pay attention. I have tremendous respect for your artistic achievements and your cultural impact. I really do. But I have to ask you something, and I think everyone here deserves to hear your answer. The tone of the confrontation was shifting, and Washington's confident expression began to falter slightly. He had expected Vivek to become defensive about his political positions or to offer some weak justification that would only make Washington's moral attack look stronger. Instead, Vivek was turning the tables and challenging Washington's own authenticity. You just called me a sellout minority who betrays his community, Vivek continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. You suggested that I've used my success to harm other minorities and perpetuate systemic inequality. You positioned yourself as the authentic voice of community, responsibility, and social justice. He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze steady and unwavering. But I have to ask you, Denzel, what exactly in your own lifestyle and choices qualifies you to lecture anyone about community responsibility? What have you actually done for the communities you claim to represent that gives you the moral authority to judge how other successful minorities should live their lives? The question hit the ballroom like a thunderbolt, and the audience fell into an uncomfortable silence. This wasn't how these panels usually went. Cultural icons were supposed to be able to deliver moral judgments without having their own authenticity questioned in return. Because when I look at your actual life, Vivek continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom with unmistakable authority, I don't see someone who lives among the communities he claims to represent. I see someone who has built a $300 million fortune while living in one of the most exclusive and isolated communities in America. He pulled out his phone, and the gesture was both theatrical and devastating. Let me share some facts about your lifestyle with this audience of activists and community leaders. You live in a $28 million mansion in Beverly Hills, one of the wealthiest and most exclusive neighborhoods in the world. Your neighbors aren't struggling minority families. They're other millionaire celebrities who are as disconnected from ordinary Americans as any group in the country. The ballroom was dead silent now, the atmosphere completely transformed from moral celebration to shocked attention. Washington sat rigid in his chair, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized where this was heading. You make $20 million per movie, Vivek continued, consulting his phone. That's more money for a few months of work than most of the families in the communities you claim to represent will see in their entire lifetimes. You earn more in one film than hundreds of working families will make in their entire careers. The financial disparity was staggering, and everyone in the room could see the fundamental disconnect between Washington's wealth and the communities he claimed to champion. But here's what really exposes your disconnection from the communities you lecture others about serving, Vivek said, his voice rising with conviction. When was the last time you lived in a minority community? When was the last time you sent your children to public schools in underperforming districts? When was the last time you shopped in minority neighborhoods, worshiped in community churches, or participated in the daily life of the people you claim to represent? The questions were devastating because they highlighted how Washington's wealth had completely insulated him from the experiences of ordinary minority families. Your children went to elite private schools, Vivek continued. The same schools attended by the children of Wall Street executives and tech billionaires. You vacation in exclusive resorts that cost more per night than most families spend on housing per month. You travel in private jets to avoid the kind of public transportation that working families depend on every day. The systematic exposure of Washington's elite lifestyle was particularly effective because it showed how his success had separated him from rather than connected him to the communities he claimed to represent. You called me a sellout, Vivek said, but let's talk about what actually constitutes selling out. What's more of a sellout? Someone who builds businesses that create jobs for minority communities, or someone who makes millions pretending to be other people while lecturing real entrepreneurs about community responsibility. The comparison was devastating because it highlighted the fundamental difference between creating actual value and simply performing for entertainment. My pharmaceutical company employs hundreds of minority workers, Vivek continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Research scientists, lab technicians, manufacturing workers, administrative staff. Real jobs with real paychecks that allow real families to build better lives through their own work and achievement. The tangible community impact was a stark contrast to Washington's theoretical activism, showing how business success could provide more concrete benefits than celebrity moral messaging. But what jobs have you created for minority communities? Vivek asked. What businesses have you built that provide opportunities for advancement? What have you actually produced besides entertainment content that you sell to the same Hollywood system that you claim perpetuates inequality? The questions expose the fundamental hollowness of Washington's community activism, showing how it consisted of rhetoric rather than concrete action that actually improved people's lives. And let's talk about the Hollywood system that has made you wealthy, Vivek continued, pulling out another document. The same system that you've enriched yourself through for decades while occasionally giving speeches about social justice and community responsibility. The attack was shifting to Hollywood's own role in perpetuating the problems that Washington claimed to oppose. Hollywood has one of the worst records on diversity and inclusion of any major industry, Vivek said, consulting his document. Behind-the-scenes positions are overwhelmingly dominated by wealthy white liberals. Executive positions, directing roles, producer credits, writing positions, all dominated by the same elite networks that exclude the very communities you claim to champion. The industry hypocrisy was being exposed, showing how Washington had succeeded within a system that systematically excluded minorities from positions of real power and influence. You've made $300 million working in an industry that talks about diversity while maintaining exclusionary practices that would be illegal in most other sectors, Vivek continued. You've enriched yourself through a system that pays lip service to social justice while perpetuating exactly the kind of elite gatekeeping that keeps minority communities from accessing real opportunities. The complicity in systemic exclusion was particularly damaging because it showed how Washington had profited from the very problems he claimed to oppose. But here's what really exposes your fake activism, Vivek said, his momentum building. While you've been giving speeches about community, responsibility, and minority empowerment, you've been living a lifestyle that's completely disconnected from the communities you claim to represent. The accusation of performative activism was hitting at the core of Washington's moral authority and public image. You talk about systemic barriers, Vivek continued, but you've never had to overcome the kind of barriers that ordinary minority entrepreneurs face every day. You achieved success in entertainment, an industry where talent and charisma can overcome systematic disadvantages. You've never had to build a business from scratch, never had to navigate complex regulatory environments, never had to compete in markets where success requires more than just performance ability. The distinction between entertainment success and business achievement was crucial, highlighting how Washington's path to wealth was fundamentally different from the entrepreneurial challenges that most minorities faced. And let's talk about your political activism, Vivek said, pulling out what appeared to be his most damaging evidence. You support politicians and policies that make it harder for minority entrepreneurs to succeed, that increase regulatory burdens on small businesses, that create more barriers to economic advancement for exactly the communities you claim to care about. The political hypocrisy was being exposed, showing how Washington's activism actually harmed minority economic opportunities. You support higher taxes on successful minorities, Vivek continued, effectively punishing people who achieve exactly the kind of success you've enjoyed. You advocate for regulations that make it harder for minority-owned businesses to compete with established corporations. You promote policies that increase dependence on government programs rather than creating opportunities for economic independence. The systematic opposition to minority business success was particularly damaging because it showed how Washington's political positions contradicted his supposed commitment to community empowerment. So when you call me a sellout, Vivek said, his voice reaching a crescendo, I have to ask, what's more of a sellout? Someone who creates real jobs and opportunities for minority communities through business success? Or someone who makes hundreds of millions of dollars entertaining people while supporting policies that make it harder for other minorities to achieve similar success? The comparison was devastating because it highlighted the fundamental difference between creating opportunities and simply talking about them while living in complete isolation from their consequences. You want to know what real community betrayal looks like? Vivek asked, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. It's making $300 million while lecturing others about community responsibility. It's living in a $28 million mansion while attacking successful minorities for being disconnected from their communities. It's supporting policies that harm minority entrepreneurs while enriching yourself through an industry that systematically excludes minorities from real power. The role reversal was complete, and everyone in the ballroom could see how Washington's accusations had backfired spectacularly. Real community betrayal is using your platform to promote dependency rather than achievement, Vivek continued, encouraging victimhood rather than empowerment, supporting government solutions rather than entrepreneurial innovation that actually creates wealth and opportunities in minority communities. The philosophical critique was particularly powerful because it went to the heart of different approaches to minority advancement and community development. You called me a sellout for promoting conservative principles, Vivek said, but conservative principles are what create the economic opportunities that allow minority communities to build wealth, start businesses, and achieve the kind of success that you've enjoyed through entertainment. The defense of conservative economics as pro-minority was especially effective in this context because it highlighted how Washington's progressive politics actually worked against minority economic advancement. I haven't betrayed my community, Vivek continued, his voice growing stronger. I've shown them what's possible through hard work, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I've created jobs, built businesses, and demonstrated that success comes from effort and achievement rather than government programs and victim narratives. The positive vision of minority achievement through business success was a stark contrast to Washington's dependency-based activism, showing different paths to community empowerment. So Denzel, Vivek said, beginning to conclude his response. The next time you want to call someone a sellout, maybe you should examine your own lifestyle and ask whether living in a $28 million mansion while lecturing others about community responsibility represents authentic activism or elite hypocrisy. He gathered his thoughts for his final statement. And the next time you want to attack successful minorities for their political beliefs, maybe you should consider whether your own political positions actually help or harm the communities you claim to represent. His final words would echo in that ballroom long after the panel was over. I'll keep building businesses, creating jobs, and showing minority communities what's possible through entrepreneurship and achievement. You can keep making movies and giving speeches about social justice while living in complete isolation from the communities you claim to champion. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Washington sat motionless in his chair, his moral authority completely destroyed by the exposure of his elite lifestyle and disconnection from the communities he claimed to represent. His attack on conservative minorities had backfired spectacularly, revealing his own hypocrisy and performative activism. The audience sat in stunned silence, many clearly recognizing the fundamental contradictions in Washington's approach that Vivek had systematically exposed. The panel had become an education in the difference between authentic community service and celebrity moral posturing. The confrontation between Vivek Ramaswamy and Denzel Washington had exposed something crucial about celebrity activism: the fundamental disconnect between Hollywood wealth and the communities that celebrities claim to represent, and the hypocrisy of attacking successful minorities while living in complete isolation from minority experiences. It had highlighted how celebrity moral authority often masked elite privilege and political positions that actually harmed the communities they claimed to champion. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that all the cultural influence in the world couldn't overcome the simple truth that authentic community service required actual engagement with communities rather than moral lecturing from mansions, and that minority advancement was better served by creating opportunities than by promoting dependency and victimhood narratives. The age of unquestioned celebrity moral authority was over. The age of demanding authenticity from cultural icons had begun. And it had started with an entrepreneur from Ohio who had the courage to challenge a Hollywood legend with the most powerful weapon in American discourse: the truth about elite hypocrisy and disconnection from the communities they claim to serve.